All right, so we'll start. Good evening. I'm honored to welcome you to the third year and third day of the Poetry Place International Festival. My name is Noah Shakarji, and I'm part of the literary committee of the Poetry Place, along with Gilad Meiri. This session is dedicated to the American poet Charles Bernstein and will be hosted by Bernstein's Hebrew translator, Amit Ben-Ami. I will introduce Amit, and he will introduce Charles in a minute. So, Amit Ben-Ami is a poet and translator. In 2020, he published his first book of poems, Cup Water. It's a great book. If you haven't read it, please do. In 2021, his translations of Gertrude Stein's lectures were published in the book Poetry and Grammar in Dhak Publishing House. Amit is a graduate student in the Department of English Literature at the University of Haifa. And this session will be about an hour. And I invite you to write questions and comments in the chat box. We will dedicate the last 10 minutes or so to a short Q&A. Now I pass the microphone to Amit, and I wish you a pleasant evening, please.
Thank you, Noah, and shalom to everybody in the crowd. I've written some stuff down because when I'm excited, I tend to forget how to speak. And so I'll start with introducing Charles. So Charles Bernstein, you are a poet, essayist, editor, and literary scholar, the author of a vast mass of poetry collections, the last of which are Topsy-Turvy, published in 2021, under what you call the time of COVIDity, and Near Miss, published in 2018, on the occasion of which you received the Bollingen Prize in 2019, which according to Wikipedia is the premier American prize for lifetime achievement in poetry. You are also the author of many essay collections and an editor of anthologies and volumes, but most famously of Language magazine, which came out between 1978 to 1981, and was the constituting ground for the avant-garde poets that became known as the language poets. You've also taught for many years, and today you are Professor Emeritus of English and Comparative Literature at the University of Pennsylvania. You've long been a resident of Brooklyn, New York, but tonight you are speaking to us from Paris, France. Charles, how are you?
I'm good, and it's good to be with you. Good to be here in Paris on a warm spring day, and happy to be doing this with you bilingually. I guess we'll start with just the Hebrew for the poems.
Right. And just before we start, I want to say to the audience that we've chosen to do this event without like a shared screen of all the poems, but we've sent, in the chat, there's a link that leads where you can download all the poems, like a PDF with all the poems, and we invite you to look at them yourselves. We just wanted to have like a more direct interaction. So I invite you to put the Zoom on speaker view and not gallery, so you could see us reading and performing the poems. And with that, I think we'll begin, right, Charles? Anything else for?
Absolutely, I'm ready to go. So
great.
the first poem we're going to read in alternating sentences. I'll start with the English, and then Amit's translation, which in English, the poem is called "Thank You for Saying Thank You."
ובעברית, תודה על אמירת התודה. את השיר הזה תרגם ערן הדס.
In New York, we are very polite, and we like to thank people for thanking us, and then thank them for thanking us, and then thank them for thanking. Often could go on 3-4 hours. There seems to be no way out because you're so grateful to be thanked and then thanked for the thank. So that's where the title comes from. And here is the poem. This is a totally accessible poem.
זהו שיר נגיש לחלוטין.
There is nothing in this poem that is in any way difficult to understand.
אין שום דבר בשיר הזה שיכול להיות באיזושהי דרך קשה להבנה.
All the words are simple and to the point.
כל המילים הן פשוטות ולעניין.
There are no new concepts, no theories, no ideas to confuse you.
אין שום תפיסות חדשות, שום תורות, שום רעיונות שיבלבלו אותך.
This poem has no intellectual pretensions.
לשיר הזה אין שום יומרות אינטלקטואליות.
It is purely emotional.
הוא לגמרי אמוציונלי.
It fully expresses the feelings of the author, my feelings, the person speaking to you now.
כולו מביע את רגשותיו של המחבר. הרגשות שלי, האדם שמדבר אליך כרגע.
It is all about communication.
כל העניין הוא תקשורת.
Heart to heart.
לב אל לב.
This poem appreciates and values you as a reader.
השיר הזה מכבד ומעריך אותך כקורא.
It celebrates the triumph of the human imagination amidst pitfalls and calamities.
הוא חוגג את מצעד ניצחונו של הדמיון האנושי בינות מלכודות ופורענויות.
This poem has 90 lines, 269 words, and more syllables than I have time to count.
השיר הזה מכיל 90 שורות, 221 מילים, וכן יותר הברות מכפי שיש לי זמן לספור.
Each line, word, and syllable has been chosen to convey only the intended meaning and nothing more.
כל שורה, מילה והברה נבחרו להעביר אך ורק את המשמעות המיועדת ודבר לא יותר מכך.
This poem abjures obscurity and enigma.
השיר הזה מתכחש לעמימות ולמסתורין.
There is nothing hidden.
שום דבר אינו חבוי.
100 readers would each read the poem in an identical manner and derive the same message from it.
100 קוראים יקראו את השיר בצורה זהה ויסיקו את אותו מסר ממנו.
This poem, like all good poems, tells a story in a direct style that never leaves the reader guessing.
השיר הזה, כמו כל השירים הטובים, מספר סיפור בסגנון ישיר, אשר לעולם אינו מותיר את הקורא מנחש.
While at times expressing bitterness, anger, resentment, xenophobia, and hints of racism, its ultimate mood is affirmative.
בעוד שלעיתים יביע מרירות, כעס, תרעומת, שנאת זרים ושמץ של גזענות, רוחו בבסיסה היא חיובית.
It finds joy even in those spiteful moments of life that it shares with you.
הוא מוצא נחת אפילו ברגעים הזדוניים של החיים אשר הוא חולק איתך.
This poem represents the hope for a poetry that doesn't turn its back on the audience, that doesn't think it's better than the reader, that is committed to poetry as a popular form, like kite flying and fly fishing.
השיר הזה מייצג את התקווה לשירה שלא תפנה את גבה לקהל, שלא חושבת שהיא טובה יותר מן הקורא, שמחויבת לשירה כאל מהות פופולרית, כמו האפת עפיפונים ודייג דגים.
This poem belongs to no school, has no dogma.
השיר הזה אינו שייך לשום אסכולה, אין לו שום דוגמה.
It follows no fashion.
הוא לא מציית לשום אופנה.
It says just what it says.
הוא פשוט...
It says just what it says. It's real.
הוא פשוט אומר מה שהוא אומר. הוא אמיתי. All right, so that was thank you for saying thank you. And we'll just proceed on to the next one, right?
Okay, so odd to read that poem in such a, the kind of a Zoom space, because it's it's a pretty silly poem. And not hearing the reaction, but this next goes way back, and it's your choice, Amit. It's Stray Straws and Straw Men from 1977. It's an essay that I wrote early on, and we're going to read a couple of sections from it. 3 sections. I guess we'll do it section for section. This is section 8. A sign of the particularity of a piece of writing is that it contains itself, has established its own place, situates itself next to us. We move up close, stare in, and see a world. It has moving parts, accountable and unaccountable recurrences, a particular light, a heavy, dense odor. But can I actually experience it? Yes, but it reveals the conditions of its occurrence at the same time as it is experienced. So I don't feel a part of it as much as facing it. Of course, at times you forget. All of a sudden, a few hours, a week flash by before you actually notice, and you say to yourself how the time slips.
אוקיי, אז בעברית זה נקרא קשקושי קשים ואנשי קש, כמו שצ'ארלס אמר, זה מ-1977, ונקרא גם את סעיף 8. סימן לייחודיותו של קטע כתוב הוא שהוא מכיל את עצמו, ייסד מקום משלו, ממצב עצמו לידינו. אנחנו מתקרבים, בוהים פנימה ורואים עולם. יש בו חלקים נעים, הישנויות ניתנות ובלתי ניתנות להסבר, אור מסוים, ריח דחוס וכבד. אבל אני יכול באמת לחוות את זה? כן, אך זה מגלה את התנאים להתרחשותו באותו הזמן שזה נחבא. כך שאיני מרגיש חלק מזה, אלא במידה רבה מול זה. כמובן, לעתים אתה שוכח, לפתע פתאום. כמה שעות, שבוע, מבזיקים מעליך מבלי שתבחין, ואתה אומר לעצמך, איך הזמן חולף.
9 begins with a quote from Thoreau. Next to us, the grandest laws are continuously being executed. Next to us is not the workman whom we have hired, with whom we love so well to talk, but the workman whose work we are. Next to, fronting the world with a particular constellation of beliefs, values, memories, expectations, a culture, a way of seeing, mythography, language, but we are beside ourselves in a sane way. For what is beside us is also ourselves. At the same time, in and beside, the signs of language of a piece of writing are not artificial constructions, mere structures, mere naming, They do not sit deanimated as symbols in a code, dummies for things of nature they refer to, but are of themselves, of ourselves, whatever is such, substance, actuality, presence, the very plane through which we front the world, by which the world is.
תשע. לידינו החוקים הנשגבים ביותר יוצאים לפועל ללא הרף. לידינו לא העובד אשר שכרנו, איתו אנו אוהבים כל כך לדבר, אלא העובד שעבודתו אנחנו. ליד, ניצבים בפני העולם עם מערך מסוים של אמונות, ערכים, זיכרונות, ציפיות, תרבות, דרך ראייה, מיתוגרפיה, שפה. אולם אנו לצד עצמנו באופן שפוי, כי מה שלצידנו גם הוא עצמנו. באותו הזמן בתוך ולצד. הסימנים של השפה, של קטע כתוב, אינם הבניות מלאכותיות, הבניות גרדה, שיום גרדה. הם אינם יושבים דוממים כסמלים בתוך צופן, בובות דמה עבור דברים בטבע אותם הם מציינים, אלא הינם לעצמם, לעצמנו, מה שלכשעצמו מספק, חומר, אקטואליות, נוכחות, המישור עצמו, אשר דרכו אנו ניצבים בפני העולם, אשר באמצעותו העולם הינו.
10. Compare these two views of what poetry is. In the one, an instance, a recording perhaps of reality or fantasy or experience or event is presented to us through the writing. In the other, the writing itself is seen as an instance of reality or fantasy or experience or event.
10. השווה שתי השקפות אלה על מה היא שירה. באחת, מופע, הקלטה אולי, של מציאות, פנטזיה, התנסות או אירוע, מוגש לנו דרך הכתיבה. ובאחרת, הכתיבה עצמה נראית כמופע של מציאות, פנטזיה, התנסות או אירוע. All right, so that was 3 sections out of Stray Straws and Straw Men, which is an essay that you wrote that was published in Language. Language magazine, maybe I'll write it in the chat. It's spelled with the equals. 1 second. Here, Language magazine. So Language is a super influential magazine that I've mentioned in the beginning. And the poem we started with, Thank You for Saying Thank You, could easily be used as a prominent example, not only of your poetry, but of language poetry in general. So Charles, I want to ask, what would you say you were trying to do back then? And what does language poetry mean to you today?
Well, I'm in Paris actually because they've translated, a group of poets and scholars have translated the full Language book. And so we're celebrating that into French. So curiously, I've revisited some of these essays to read at the launch for that. I think that the section that you picked from the essay sort of expresses a little bit of what the orientation I was, a little of my orientation in the 70s. We were interested in foregrounding or making more palpable the aspects of language, its syntax, its sound, its grammar, its form, rather than use language as a transparent medium to express something that comes from outside the language. And that remains true. But when you say that, it's a very general orientation, and people approach it in 100 or even 1,000 different ways. It resists a certain type of poetry with a single voice expressing a lyric sentiment that dominated American poetry at that time and still is very dominant. So it provides an alternative, an aesthetic alternative, indeed focusing on aesthesis experience. The first poem is in a way, it furthers some of those views. It's not typical of other people's writing because of the style of it. Of course, it's extremely lucid, and at the same time, it's sarcastic. Sarcasm is also something I'm interested in. That poem is among the most sarcastic, almost to an extreme, because usually I like irony to sort of dissolve into affirmation or resonance. And in that case, it's pretty arch, that it means the opposite of what it says in its lucidity. It's a comic poem. It's why it's funny to read into the Zoom void. Not that you're a void. I know you're there, but I can't hear you or hear any resonance to it. So it's a didactic poem that brings out some of the desires for clarity that I am resisting, and notes why this concept of clarity it can be ridiculed as ludicrous. The imagination that you can be clear in that way in a poem. I know a lot of people would disagree with what I'm saying in that poem, and here it's remains very much against the grain.
Right. And all right, I think we'll proceed. I mean, the next poem and the next question are just like, continuance of that. So our next one is going to be The Honor of Virtue, a short poem, and I'll start with the Hebrew. One second. Okay. כבודה של המידה הטובה. מה שאני אומר הוא מה שהתכוונתי, ומה שראיתי הוא מה שאמרתי, אך אינו נראה ואינו נאמר, מה שחשבתי שחשבתי.
The honor of virtue. What I say is what I meant, and what I saw is what I said. But neither seen nor spoke is what I think I thought.
Wonderful poem. Thank you. And I'd like to also say some things about it. So this poem we've just read, again, in continuing what you just explained about language poetry like back in the day. So this poem disrupts the premise of language as a mere act of expression, or might I even say attacks the bridge that we imagine language is, leading what's inside to the outside. Thus, the poem might suggest language as an autonomy of meaning, or an occurrence where multiple meanings can be created. So now, a key figure of that notion of language in American poetry more than a century ago was Gertrude Stein, which I assume you would agree is an important and influential predecessor of your own poetry. And with you broadcasting tonight from Paris, the city which Stein loved and lived in most of her life, I'd like to ask two things. One is for you to tell us how you see your connection to Stein. And the second one also about your effort to set the record straight regarding the accusations of her collaboration with the Vichy regime in Nazi-occupied France. So it's two different things, but I wanted to...
Okay. Well, for one thing I would say about The Honor of Virtue, in addition to what you said, that it's a comic poem. And so while it makes perhaps the philosophical points that you're getting at, it also does it in a vernacular. And for me, the vernacular is a very important aspect of what my work is. Growing up speaking English, but having different languages in my family history, and even more so different languages around me in New York. I like accent. I like vernacular. So the philosophical points are made in this kind of comic vernacular way. Well, Stein, yes, great to be in Paris, the home of Gertrude Stein. In some ways, she's an American, but perhaps she's also a French writer, or a writer of France, although she always wrote in English and in vernacular English often, even if not what's conventionally understood by vernacular. I wrote my undergraduate thesis on Stein and Wittgenstein. This was a combination that was in 1971, 72, very odd perhaps, but in a philosophy context. But now I think maybe makes more sense in terms of their understanding of language and everyday life and the way that language and thought interacts. I have so many essays about these things, it's impossible for me to condense those things. On the controversy around Stein, I encourage those interested to go to Jacket 2 and maybe just type in the word Jacket 2 and my name and Vichyland, and you'll come up with a whole dossier which tries to, which doesn't try to, but which fully refutes the disinformation campaign, by the way, some of which comes from Israel, because it's tied into a right-wing attack on secular Jews and free-thinking Jews. And you can see actually some of the evidence of that. It's rather scary. And accepted in some degree by the liberal media in the United States to discredit Stein, and it's a disgrace. Her politics are not my politics. I wasn't living in occupied France as a lesbian Jew, and I think that the hubris of the judgment is repellent. And you can read my comments in detail because everything I'm saying is backed up. I think that also that this attack on Stein is an attempt to discredit writing, which is not conventional, by people who take conventional writing and clarity, as in my first poem, as a kind of theological point. So it's like it's theologically necessary to dispute this, even at the cost of history, facts, context.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and for us Hebrew speakers, if you step into the Wikipedia value about Stein in Hebrew, you'll see it's full of that. I mean, the accusations of Stein being a collaborator of the Nazis and all that. So
this is all false, and actually some of it comes from Israeli and New York right-wing disinformation centers. The fact that so many people who are not right-wing want to accept that is an indictment of their thinking and their willingness to participate in what otherwise they claim to attack. And by that, I mean the New York Review of Books, the New York Times, and the New Yorker in the US. So it's a dark chapter, and it continues. Stein was not a person whose politics would necessarily fly today, but she was certainly not any of the things that that was accused. I mean, her real crime was that she was a Jew that survived and lived, and that seems to be repellent to many people.
Yes, and I'd like to also add thank you for the effort of setting that record straight.
But do read if you're interested. Please don't take my word, because people say all kinds of things. I'm not interested in I'm summarizing something. I'm not justifying it here, but we do justify it in this Jacket 2 site. And I'm very interested in the empirical research, the sources, the documents, and we do that there. So my opinion isn't worth anything. What I'm saying, I'm telling you the summary, but you if you're interested, don't rely upon what I'm saying. Go back and look at the evidence that's provided.
So how about we read some more poems?
Okay, poems. Boy, you got us distracted there. Let us continue on. On unconstrained writing, should I do that first?
Yes,
and
but first,
let's go with that. Oh, they're putting it up on the screen.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so you could see me reading. I don't know why are all the words broken up that way? Is there something wrong with the way in which the display? Oh, I wrote it that way. Here it is. Unconstrained writing. Air is no concealment. Air is only different degrees of concealing. You can't teach a new dog old tunes anymore, and who can teach an old dog to dig it? Shame, shame, shame. Of fossils dedualize and live.
כתיבה חסרת מעצורים. אין הסרה של אות, יש רק דרגות שונות של הסתרה. אי אפשר ללמד כלב חדש מנגינות ישנות יותר משאפשר ללמד כלב זקן לקלוט קטע. בושה, בושה, בושה. מי שמתבייש טיפש. בטלו שניות וחיו.
You know, it reminds me in a funny way hearing you read it too. I was bar mitzvahed without really learning Hebrew, but I was able to, you know, I learned to sound out the letters. This is what we did in New York for people like me. But de-dualize and live. So de-dualize and live. But when you sound out the syllables, you don't really know what you're saying. And syllable by syllable, it kind of brings back that kind of trying to read Hebrew without knowing the words.
Well, it's interesting to say that. I think there are those bar mitzvah kids in Israel that speak Hebrew and also don't really understand what they're reading.
Right. Well, but you sound it out, you know, because you put the vowels for below.
Yeah.
You know, you don't bring together the full words, so it breaks it up in that way. Yeah. Okay, so now we're doing the ballad.
Yes, we'll continue with the next poem, and so we'll do stanza to stanza, right?
Okay, yeah, all right, and I'll start. This is for my son Felix from 2003, the year that the U.S. invaded Iraq. The Ballad of the Girly Man for Felix. The truth is hidden in a veil of tears. The scabs of the mourners grow thick with fear.
האמת חבויה בצעיף של דמעות. גלדי האבלים מתעבים ממוראות.
A democracy once proposed is slimed and grimed again by men with brute design who prefer hate to rhyme.
דמוקרטיה שפעם הוצאה, קיצצו וטינפו אותה שוב. גברים מבטון עצוב שמעדיפים שנאה על חרוז.
Complexity is a four-letter word for those who count by nots and halves, who revile the facts of Darwin, to worship the truth according to Halliburton.
מורכבות היא כללה בת 4 אותיות, עבור מי שמודד לפי עומק הכיס, שמשמיץ את העובדות של דרווין, כדי לסגוד לאמת של מקדח הנפט.
The truth is hidden in a veil of tears. The scabs of the mourners grow thick with fear.
האמת חבויה בצעיף של דמעות, גלדי האבלים מתעבים ממוראות.
Thugs from hell have taken freedom's store. The rich get richer, the poor die quicker. And the only God that sanctions that is no God at all, but rhetorical crap.
בריונים מגהנום עכשיו מוכרים לנו חירות. העשירים מתעשרים, העניים מתפגרים, והאל היחיד של הזה סנגור אינו אל בכלל, אלא חרטה רטורי.
So be a girly man and take a girly stand. Sing a girly song and dance with a girly sarong.
אז תהיה נקבה גבר, ותעמוד על שלך כמו ילדה. תשיר כמו ילדה בשמחה, ותרקוד בסמלה של גבר.
Poetry will never win the war on terror, but neither will error abetted by error.
שירה לעולם לא תנצח את המלחמה בטרור, אך גם לא שגיאה שעוד שגיאה תגרור.
We girly men are not afraid of uncertainty or reason or interdependence. We think before we fight, then think some more. Proclaim our faith in listening, in art, in compromise.
גברים נקבות אנחנו לא מפחדים, מאי ודאות או היגיון או תלות הדדית, אנחנו חושבים לפני שאנו מכים, ואז עוד קצת חושבים, נשבעים אמונים לפשרה, לאומנות, להקשבה.
So be a girly man and sing this girly song, sissies and proud, that we would never lie our way to war.
אז תהיה נקבה גבר, ושיר את שיר הנקבות, הומואים וגאים שלעולם לא נשקר כל הדרך למלחמה.
The girly men killed Christ. So the platinum DVD says. The Jews and blacks and gays are still standing in the way.
את ישו רצחו גברים נקבות, כך שובר הקופות אומר. שחורים, הומואים ויהודים, עד היום בדרכנו עומדים.
We're sorry we killed your God a long, long time ago, but each dead soldier in Iraq kills the God inside, the God that's still not dead.
סליחה שרצחנו לכם את האל כל כך מזמן, אך כל חייל הרוג בעיראק הורג את האל שבפנים, האל שעדיין לא מת.
The truth is hidden in a veil of tears. The scabs of the mourners grow thick with fear.
האמת חבויה בצעיף של דמעות, גלדי האבלים מתעבים ממוראות.
So be a girly man and sing a girly song. Take a girly stand and dance with a girly sarong.
אז תהיה נקבה גבר, ותעמוד על שלך כמו ילדה. תשיר כמו ילדה בשמחה, ותרקוד בסמלה של גבר.
Thugs from hell have taken freedom's store. The rich get richer, the poor die quicker. And the only God that sanctions that is no God at all, but rhetorical crap.
בריונים מגהנום עכשיו מוכרים לנו חירות. העשירים מתעשרים, העניים מתפגרים, והאל היחיד של הזה סנגור אינו אל בכלל, אלא חרטא רטורי.
So be a girly man. Sing this holy song, sissies and proud, that we would never lie our way to war.
אז תהיה נקבה, גבר, ושיר את שיר הנקבות. הומואים וגאים, שלעולם לא נשקר כל הדרך למלחמה.
The scabs of mourners grow thick with fear. The truth is hidden in a veil of tears.
גלדי האבלים מתעבים ממוראות. האמת חבויה בצעיף של דמעות. All right.
So I should note that Girly Man was the charge that then governor of California, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Republican governor, but the charge that the Republicans made against anti-war views, protesters, they called us girly men for refusing the macho right to invade Iraq, something that 2003 was beginning and just ended now in the debacle of Afghanistan and the U.S. withdrawal. So it was 20 years almost of horror, but wars as the one now in the Ukraine continue with unspeakable horror.
True, yes, and of course, that's what also makes it so relevant. I mean, to Ukraine now, but also, you know, to the situation in Israel.
Mm-hmm. And I regret that I said unspeakable, just because I would say speakable. It is speakable, and it needs to be spoken. So we go to the last. Second to last is a short.
Yeah, I just have
also from Girly Man.
I'd like to ask a question before our next poem.
Okay.
So I'm going back to one line from Girly Man, from the poem we just read, where the line says, "Poetry will never win the war on terror." So I'd like to ask then, what should be poetry's political aspirations, or what should be our political expectations of poetry, if any?
And all with 15 minutes remaining in this broadcast.
Well, you know, you said that you can manage with short.
I can. Maybe that's my. I think poetry has a different function than macro politics and political policy making, and it's an area for reflection on thought and what constitutes the terms of macro political. By macro political, I mean practical political debate. So the very nouns and policy terms that we use to frame need to be unframed and thought about, opened up and questioned. And this aesthetic realm, which also can be comic and is committed to pleasure, in my view, is a necessary prerequisite for democracy and for political thought, but is not the same as policymaking.
Okay, so we should have some expectations, political expectations of the practice.
Well, I think poetry is inherently political, and I think everything that I've talked about in the poems that you picked are clearly political. I think that vernacular is political. I think resisting conventional forms. I think ideas of clarity that impose one single truth, which is often false, is political, and to contest those ideas and claims for truth, often religiously based, but sometimes based, sometimes that try to hide their theological basis. I think that those are all political things, and they're a prerequisite for democracy and for political thinking. And that poetry, the wilder it is and the more it contests conventional thinking, the more significant it is for democratic social space.
And well, actually, I think the next poem that we're going to read is very much connected to what you're saying. And I have to say that I think of all of them, I had the most fun translating this one. And the feeling I had with it is the expansion of language, as in like a wide space of opportunities. And maybe before saying more about it, we'll just read it. So
okay, this is
line by line.
2001. I'll start in the English. Let's just say.
So you want to do line by line or just
line by line? And yeah, and just noting also this is from the book called Girly Man.
Right.
Let's just say that every time you fall, you never hit the ground.
בואי רק נגיד שבכל פעם שאת נופלת, את לא פוגעת בקרקע.
Let's just say that when the day ends, the night refuses to come.
בואי רק נגיד שכשהיום נגמר, הלילה מסרב לבוא.
Let's just say that if all else fails you, at least you can count on that.
בואי רק נגיד שאם כל דבר אחר כושל, תוכלי לפחות על זה לסמוך.
Let's just say that a bird in the fist is better than a bird and a foot.
בואי רק נגיד שציפור בכף היד עדיפה על ציפור בכף רגל.
Let's just say that the scarlet ambrosia of your innermost longing is the nectar of a God who never chooses to visit.
בואי רק נגיד שאמברוסיית השני של כמיותייך הפנימיות היא נקטר של אל שאף פעם לא בא לבקר.
Let's just say that if chance accords possibilities, melancholy postpones insomnia.
בואי רק נגיד שאם סיכוי תואם אפשרויות, מלנכוליה דוחה נדודי שינה.
Let's just say that sleep is the darker side of dreams.
בואי רק נגיד ששינה היא הצד האפל יותר של חלומות.
Let's just say that sometimes a rose is just a red flower.
בואי רק נגיד שלפעמים ורד הוא רק פרח שנקרא אדום.
Let's just say that every step forward is also a step nowhere.
בואי רק נגיד שכל צעד קדימה הוא גם צעד לשום מקום.
Let's just say that the thirst for knowledge can only be quenched if one learns how to remain hungry.
בואי רק נגיד שאת הצמא לידע יכול להרוות רק מי שלומד איך להישאר רעב.
Let's just say that green is always a reflection of the idea of green.
בואי רק נגיד שירוק הוא תמיד השתקפות של הרעיון של ירוק.
Let's just say that I encounter myself not in the mirror, but in the manure.
בואי רק נגיד שאני נפגש עם עצמי, לא במראה, אלא במדמנה.
Let's just say that each door leads to another door.
בואי רק נגיד שכל דלת מובילה לעוד דלת.
Let's just say we think it before we see it, or better, we see it as we think it.
בואי רק נגיד שאנו חושבים את זה לפני שאנו רואים את זה, או אפילו רואים את זה בזמן שאנו חושבים את זה.
Let's just say that a stone's throw might be a world away.
בואי רק נגיד שיריקה מפה יכולה להיות שנות אור מכאן.
Let's just say that love is neither here nor there.
בואי רק נגיד שאהבה היא לא פה ולא שם.
Let's just say that the girl is the mother of the woman.
בואי רק נגיד שהילדה היא אימה של האישה.
Let's just say that without disorder, there can be no harmony.
בואי רק נגיד שללא אי סדר לא יכולה להיות הרמוניה.
Let's just say that the aim is not to win, but not to lose too bad.
בואי רק נגיד שהמטרה היא לא לנצח, אלא לא להפסיד חזק מדי.
Let's just say that a knife in the back is better than a knife in the heart.
בואי רק נגיד שטובה סכין בגב מסכין בלב.
let's just say that between sleep and dreams is the reality behind reality.
בואי רק נגיד שבין שינה לחלומות נמצאת המציאות שמאחורי המציאות.
Let's just say that I am very weak and want to take a bath.
בואי רק נגיד שאני חלש מאוד ורוצה להיכנס לאמבטיה.
Let's just say that the truth is somewhere between us.
בואי רק נגיד שהאמת נמצאת איפשהו בינינו.
Let's just say that the top of a tower is not a good place to hide.
בואי רק נגיד שראשו של מגדל אינו מקום טוב להסתתר בו.
Let's just say that mankind suffers its language.
בואי רק נגיד שהאנושות סובלת את שפתה.
Let's just say that a bird cannot always be in flight.
בואי רק נגיד שציפור לא יכולה תמיד להיות בתעופה.
Let's just say we're not far from where we would have lived if we had lived better lives.
בואי רק נגיד שאנחנו לא רחוקים מאיפה שהיינו אם חיינו חיים טובים יותר.
Let's just say that pretty ugly is an aspiring oxymoron.
בואי רק נגיד שיפה נורא הוא אוקסימורון בשאיפה.
Let's just say that if the sun is a rock burning in space, then Earth is a shard hurtling from its designation.
בואי רק נגיד שאם השמש היא סלע שבוער בחלל, אז הארץ היא רסיס שניתז מיהודו.
Let's just say that little is gained when nothing is lost.
בואי רק נגיד שמי שלא מאבד דבר, לא מרוויח כלום.
Let's just say that the lie of the mind is the light of perception.
בואי רק נגיד שבערות התודעה היא בהירות התפיסה.
And let's just immediately segue into the final very short poem. It seems to sadly be as relevant as ever, called The Wreck of Hope. Death is the end of all sadness. Storm follows each moment of bliss. Here lies the road to true madness, deeper than locks in abyss. Storm echoes surfeit of gladness. Loneliness lives by its wits.
ובעברית, הריסות התקווה. המוות הוא קץ כל יגון. אחרי כל שעת חסד, סופה. כאן הנתיב שסופו שיגעון. עמוק מאימה שבתהום נאספה. סופה מהדהדת שמחות שגאו. הבדידות נתחכמה לסופה.
And thank you so much for these translations, which I very much appreciate your doing.
Yes, and I had a lot of fun doing them. Sometimes struggling, sometimes more flowing. And so we have like our last 5 minutes for questions from the audience, which I assume that are here in the chat, right? Am I right? Okay, there is a question here, Charles.
Okay.
That the question is, what is your opinion of nouns, and are verbs better than nouns?
Question. Gertrude Stein says one does not use nouns, and I kind of addressed that with the categories issue. I would say that language is fundamentally metaphoric, and if one thinks that nouns are objects that are real and that are not reliant on a metaphor, then you get back into really to the nexus of Stein and Wittgenstein that I was interested in the early 70s. It's the fundamental metaphoricity of language, which I would emphasize and that poetry makes possible. And it's a glorious thing. It's slanderous. It's beautiful. It's fun. It's pleasurable. And that it's not that any one, and if noun metaphorically means that objects, the object is real and then the language describes it, then that's a problem. But otherwise, all parts of speech, including the prepositions and the articles, are equal in the democracy of language and can be permuted in different ways.
Well, but is in that equality, democratic equality, is there a part of speech that you love the most?
No. I mean, it's a rhetorical point.
Yeah.
Which is more. It isn't having to do with a part of speech. Or it's in a way, it's a democratic conception of that all parts, make up the constantly reconfiguring whole, and that the parts that are neglected as insignificant are as significant.
Okay, I have a question, actually, one more that I want to ask.
Okay,
about
good.
Puns and wordplay.
Puns.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you have, like, your poetry works or even labors in many different layers, and a prominent one is the pun or the wordplay. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to ask, what are the function or place or value or options that you find in punning?
Well, there's two ways to answer that question. One of which is cognitive, and it's something I've become more aware of as I've gotten older. I live within a kind of echo chamber of language, which perhaps is not shared by everybody. I have also I reverse things. I'm not a good speller, but I physicalize language. I use one word for another. I go left for right. So I'm very conscious of language as an echo chamber. It's what I call echo poetics. And the puns are really just the way I experience things. I always experience things as puns or doubles. So part of it is that my work is actually a reflection of my cognitive state. But the other, of course, puns are funny, and I like that comic aspect. And it emphasizes the materiality and the plasticity of language. The puns are for me what meter or rhyme might be in a more traditional kind of poetics.
Amazing. Okay, I think our time is up. Right?
Yes, we're right on time.
Wow.
So that's
you did.
Let's just say thank you. Thank you, Charles Bernstein. Thank you, Amit Ben-Ami, for this wonderful conversation. It was fascinating. Please be back here, the audience. Please be back here in about 25 minutes for the final session. Daniel Oz will host the Irish poet Paul Muldoon. So we'll see you soon. And thank you again.
My great pleasure to be here. And thanks again to Amit for the translations and the work of dialogue that means.
And thank you. Thank you, everybody, for coming. See you soon.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.